Now we are having our keynote address on the stage. As mentioned here, our chief guest, Professor Rizwan Qaiser, he is the head of the Department of History and Culture at Jamia Millia, Islamia, New Delhi. And he actually needs no introduction in front of an audience like this, because he is famous for his works on Indian national movement. And one of his very important works is about Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, and he has titled the book as Resisting Colonialism and Communal Politics, Maulana Azad and Making of the Indian Nation. Actually, that is very interesting because he suggested the title for our keynote address as Muslims and the Making of the Indian Nationalism. I think making of nation or making of nationalism, such a complex process, is one of his major interests in academic research. And he has detailed how Maulana Abul Kalam Azad has contributed to the making of the Indian nationalism. So expanding that topic to from an individual to a community as a whole is trying to explain how Muslims took part in the making of the Indian nationalism. And we hope that his keynote address will throw light to all aspects of this topic, and it will enlighten us a lot. So, and actually I'm happy to say that he did his post-graduation MPhil and PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru University, which with pleasure I would say my alma mater also, although in a different period. And so I am very happy to have him here for this occasion. So I humbly request our chief guest, Professor Rizwan Qaiser, to deliver the keynote address. Welcome, sir.
Before I say anything, a word of gratitude to organizers for having thought it fit enough for a person like me to come and be the chief guest and give my presentation. If it was possible for me, I would name every single person who is associated with this organization and thought it wise enough to organize a conference of students on theme of social science, especially history. While I was traveling to Calicut, I was remembering the year 1998 when larger organization called KNM, Kerala Nadwatul Mujahideen, and a member of it who was a friend in JNU, Shahjahan Madampat, some of you might know him. He had given me an invitation to come and deliver keynote address. I was wanting to wait for another 2 years before I completed 20 years of my association with Kerala, academically, speaking on themes of history and trying to share my rambling thoughts. And that way, I'm quite grateful to MSM for inviting me here to be with you, a little generation apart. 18 to 20 years would be another generation, and 18, 20 years after it will be a younger generation, new crop, new breed of scholars. Why is it important to talk of history? Conventional wisdom says that let the buried be buried. Those who have died, gone, they better be forgotten, because there are other important things to do in life, such as buying new things, new gadgets, Android phones, and the rest, and be happy with that. But then you realize that you are not spared. Each time you thought of buying Android phone, there was an attack on your history. History being presented to you, your own history, in a highly distorted manner. Because for some people, history is a big-time business, more important than your Android phone. Then it becomes important that with the help of technology, if we can keep history closer to our heart and keep history with you, because history is not something which is dead and gone. History is something which lives with you all the time. Because as a student of history, we are given to understand that all of us, generations which have gone by, generations which are present, generations which will come, we all are products of history. And therefore, it is vitally important to understand what our history has been. It is equally vital, not only that you understand, you read, but also you write your own history. Because in the realm of knowledge, if you are only given to consumption of knowledge, I think you are being good enough, but still not being that great enough. Because in the exercise of academics, if you are only consumer of knowledge, then you are gone. Because we do not know the kind of knowledge which is being generated. Knowledge which may not have been thoroughly scrutinized on the standards of scholarship. And therefore, it is vitally important that you not only become consumers of knowledge, but you also become generators of knowledge. That in the realm of knowledge exercises, you also generate your own knowledge. Generating historical knowledge is an important part of it. And therefore, once again, I congratulate the organizers to have thought it important to organize a convention of students on a theme such as this. Now let us look at what are we dealing with. We are dealing with our history, but obviously when we talk about history, history can be an entire world, like all aspects: political, economic, cultural, linguistic, literary, your identity, your trade, commerce, your art, craft, everything. But in a small session like this, organized for the day, you cannot possibly be talking everything under the sun. And therefore, the focus which I see that's been identified by the organizers is to deal with the question of nationalism in modern times. And when we say modern times, essentially in the 19th and 20th century. Limited focus. And sometimes it is vitally important to have the focus limited. Otherwise, what goes in Urdu in northern India, I often repeat, it said, "Rehne ko ghar nahi hai, sara jahan hamara." We do not have a place to live, but we claim the entire world to be our own. And therefore, it is better to have a small hut rather than everything under the sun. And therefore, identifying the question of nationalism as the focus of today's conference, I think is important. There are two dimensions which are involved with this, and let us all apply our critical mind. And as I speak, I request each one of you to travel with me, walk with me, think with me, and try to articulate with me. Because I am not someone who is ever given to believe that just because we are sitting on a higher podium, we are wiser people than people sitting on the other side of the hall. You are as much wiser as people on this side of it, except that most of us will be older than people on the other side. But still, if we walk together, perhaps the learning process will be much more interesting. In this context, let me tell you, there are two critical things which are involved in the entire exercise that we are going to undertake during the day. Number one, important to understand nationalism, what it means like. Number two, how do Muslims fit in the larger scheme called nationalism? And there is another, where do Muslims fit in? Because Muslims are very difficult to be part of any nationalist community. Why? Many theorists, and I will be talking about them, many of them would say that, well, Muslims like Islam, they are part of the larger global community, very difficult to fit them in a specific context. And that is where I think theoretically it is vitally important to make a distinction. That Islam is a global religion, Muslims are not a global community. Fundamental distinction. Muslims follow a global religion, but they are a particularistic community. I can give you 1,000 examples, but some will qualify. Muslims in India would be vastly different from Muslims in, say, Saudi Arabia, or say Egypt, say Iraq, say, Algeria. Vastly different. Linguistically, culturally, food habits, rest other things, their history, their heroes and everything. And therefore, Indian Muslims are very specific to the particular context of India. Within that, there are layers. There are Kerala Muslims and there are Tamil Muslims next door. There are Kannada Muslims, there are Bihari Muslims, there are Punjabi Muslims, there are other kinds of Muslims. And then you realize that you have layer within layer. And it is important to understand what these layers are like in a specific context. The language that you speak, Malayalam, is incomprehensible in northern part of India. We may be following the same religion, Islam. That means within Islam there are special characteristics of people inhabiting a particular geographical area. And therefore, in the course of understanding history, it is vitally important to understand a specificity of particular people inhabiting a particular area in India elsewhere. That's the first distinction that we got to make, that Islam is a global religion, Muslims are not a global community. Though, as a part of the faith, we are part of the community of the faithful that is called Ummah. But this community of faithful, it doesn't say a specific historical community. So therefore, once again make a distinction that Ummah is a community of faithful, but when we say the specific people in a specific context, that means with distinctive features. All Ummah will not be speaking Malayalam, as all Ummah do not speak Arabic, as all Ummah do not speak other languages which are spoken in Indian subcontinent. Say for instance, people in Bangladesh would be part of Ummah but not be sharing the same language as yours. All these elaborate examples I'm giving you only to point out one thing, that Muslims must be understood in the specificity of their historical context. Any lack of it will lead to all kinds of distortions in understanding history. That's point number one. So next time when you pick up a book, next time when you want to write a book or write an essay, apply your mind to understand Muslim situation historically as well as in contemporary times. You got to keep this in mind. It is this mistake which is committed by a large number of people, not the ordinary people like you and I, but historians and political scientists of some stature, who would always like to tell you what your history has been, even before you have been able to tell the world what your history has been. Because history as an exercise is like telling your personal part of the story. Somebody will come, whisper into your ears against your neighbor, that your neighbor was conspiring a lot. And suddenly you realize that you seem to become the enemy of your neighbor even before you have known your neighbor. You become tense in your relationship precisely because you have not been on talking terms with your neighbor. You have not been telling your part of the story to your neighbor, as you have not been listening to the story of your neighbor. And therefore there is this communication gap. This communication gap which breeds suspicion, lack of understanding, distortion, everything. And that is where I think it is important to write your own history. Because in times like ours, in which we are living in 2016, the entire struggle is to occupy that space in your memory. There is an attempt to take away the existing memory. Memory of coexistence, memory of the shared past, memory of the shared ambitions, memory of collective participation, building up of institutions, and the rest. Some people are interested in taking away your memory, replacing it with something else. Because it's finally memory which also becomes source of strength in your day-to-day life. Lack of it can lead you to in directionless, myriad paths. And therefore, history is important. Why you study history? So that nobody, succeeds in the struggle for memory. Then let us try to understand what is nationalism in the context of 19th century and the 20th century. A lot of people will like to tell us, Bernard Lewis is one scholar who has authority on having worked on Islam. In the global context, number one would deny that there can anything be like nationalism relevant to Muslims. Why? Once again, because Muslims are a ummah, they are a global community. They are not bound by geography, they are not bound by everything. All the time they live a transcendental life. Whereas we all know, we do not live transcendental life. We live very much grounded life. It's specific to a particular context, historical, political, and whatever. But Bernard Lewis like us to believe that, well, they have been given to live a transcendental life. Then he said that, okay, after a point of time, because of emergence of nationalism in the western part of the world, it impacted even the Muslims. And the manner in which it impacted, they started thinking in terms of Watan. Watan, do you understand? Watan is a loose concept of the land to which you belong to. And the derivative of Watan would be Wataniyat. It also has Arabic roots. So Watan and Wataniyat is something new to Muslims because of the nature of Islam. Completely misplaced understanding by Bernard Lewis. However, in due course of time, as nationalism grew in the western part of the world, Muslims too started taking up the issue of Wataniyat. They started developing elements of nationalism among themselves. That is, alleging their loyalty or expressing their allegiance to a specific nationalism, but whatever that it was because of the Western impact. It was not happening in the natural course of it, but it was happening because of the impact of the West. In other words, what is being suggested by Bernard Lewis, whatever little nationalism that may have come to exist among Muslims across the globe could only be seen as an impact of Europe. That is, internally, they do not have ideological resources to generate nationalism as an ideology. This is something which is being talked about. Then, if you look at other theorists, I can give you n number of names. 2, 3 will suffice in this context. And I will request each one of you to bear with me till little bit of theoretical part. Because in life, what is important is that minus the theory, minus the paradigm, rest other things is a matter of detail. Let me give you a crude example. Before this hall or any building that is erected, what do you do first? You don't have sand, bricks, rods, but first thing that you do is to hire an architect to give you a design. What I'm trying to do is to behave like an architect, to share a bit of a design, to understand. Minus this, other things are the matter of details. They can be lost. They can be lost immediately. But whatever that I'm saying is trying to create a kind of a boundary within which you can locate all these facts. Many people look at Ernest Gellner a very important theorist, and it is important for each one of you to note down the name of Ernest Gellner, who wrote this world-famous theoretical book, Nations and Nationalism. Within that, the only thing that he succeeds in saying remarkably, and there is absolutely no question about his capacity to theorize, brilliant theorist, he said that, well, but nationalism has essentially been a European product. Nationalism can never be there in other societies. And if at all they exist in other societies, they can at best only be the photocopy of what happened in Europe. Number two that he says, nationalism is possible. He said it 20 years ago or more. Was possible only in an industrial society or industrializing society. That is, society which was not industrial, society which was not industrializing, it was not possible to experience nationalism. That is Ernest Gellner. There are serious problems with such formulation. I'll tell you why. But then in a while. Then there are other theorists like Anthony D. Smith. He said, and Anthony D. Smith and Ernest Gellner were like Guru Chela. Guru Chela, you understand? Guru Shishya. Guru Shishya, you understand. In Malayalam, Guru Shishya. Anthony D. Smith is Shishya. He agreed with his Guru. All that is fine. But then you have to consider ethnic roots of nationalism. What are the ethnic roots? Religion, language, this, and rest other things would fall under the ethnic roots. And these ethnic roots are coming from history. They are not necessarily product only of the 18th or 19th century when industrialization in Europe was on the rise. He said that it is a modern phenomenon. Nationalism is a modern phenomenon. Nation building process is a modern phenomenon. But it also takes place because of the ethnic conditions. However, my point with them, my issue with them is that they are identifying emergence of nationalism and building of a nation only in modern industrial context of Europe. Can people who are not industrialized or industrializing also have the history of nationalism? And that is where I said that problem with many of these European theorists are that they are so Eurocentric that they refuse to take into account the historical experiences of people like you and I in this part of the world, in other parts of the world. And therefore, I have made a classification for myself, and I'm sharing it with you, that is vitally important not to be misled by any such theoretical construction which gives you a one-sided picture. And therefore I say and submit that there are two kinds of nationalism. Nationalism can never be one. It can be multiple, but right now I'm identifying only two kinds of nationalism. One, nationalism in sovereign societies. Number two, nationalism in colonial societies. And this is not the borrowed idea. This is my own, the product of my own churning of thought process. That in the study of nationalism, we have to make a distinction, at least of the two kind. You can have many, but at least of the two kind from my point of view, nationalism in sovereign society, nationalism in colonial society. Nationalism in sovereign societies would follow a different trajectory of development. Nationalism in colonial society would follow another trajectory of development, different set of developments. Number one, colonial society, no industrialization. And still they experience nationalism. How was that possible? Because if you look at India, not people of your generation, but some people on this side, till recently India was described, is still being described, Bharat ek krishi pradhan desh hai. India is an agriculture country. That means India in the 19th century was more agriculture than what it is today. And yet in the 19th century, India experienced nationalism. So that is the first rebuttal to Ernest Gellner and Anthony Smith, that nationalism can happen even in a non-industrial society. And therefore it is not good enough to transpose European historical experience on the rest of the people in Asia and Africa. And therefore vitally important to make that kind of distinction. So therefore, the distinction number one rebuts the theoretical formulation of Ernest Gellner and Anthony Smith, that it is a product of only an industrialized or industrializing society. Number two, in the context of Europe, all kinds of factors may go in, but in the context of India, one factor which Europe never experienced, ever, that Europe was never a colony of any other imperialist power except some parts of East Europe, which was part of Ottoman Empire. But certainly not the Western Europe. Whereas Asia and Africa, we necessarily colony of one country or the other. And therefore, nationalism that happened in the 19th century in countries of Asia and Africa, especially in the 20th century, the nationalism path was a product of anti-colonial struggle. That is the second important point for us to understand. That nationalism in India, even though not an industrial society or industrializing society, is product of anti-colonial struggle. That means it is an ideology which can take shape even in a society which is not industrial. Three, vitally important to consider that nationalism in a colonial society could take place also because of the impact generated by religio-cultural identity. And therefore, you see in the 19th century, especially in the second half of the 19th century, lot of resources were mobilized from within Hindu religion and culture to reinforce emerging Indian nationalism. At the same time, lot of energy was generated from within Islamic religio-cultural resources in order to reinforce Indian nationalism. That means religio-cultural resources are important component to reinforce a political ideology such as nationalism. So therefore, my submission is that when we study nationalism, it is important that we study nationalism in this theoretical perspective in order to arrive at certain kind of conclusion, arrive at some kind of understanding, and then see whatever that we have been given to understand. Because problem with us, at least in India, to some extent Asia, that we are still mesmerized by European scholarship. We accept their argument, we quote page after page, paragraph after paragraph, as if they have said the last word. They are the ultimate source, authority, wisdom, everything, which is actually not correct. Because we have not been adequately trained to think on our own. Only we have been given the confidence that we can also construct theories. We can question their theories, we can construct our own theories. We will not be able to succeed with them. Reason? One thing which is missing from among us is the rigor of research. We go for shortcut. We are the people of shortcut. You know, like while we travel to the market, first thing that we do, what is the shortcut? So we take a shortcut. Degree, some shortcut. Research, I can tell you, doubly shortcut. Research scholars will use Google, as if Google has become a substitute for the library, Calicut University library. Wikipedia, which is Ullupedia. It doesn't teach you anything. Factual things are wrong. No perspective. All distortion. Wikipedia has become a parallel source of research. Earlier people used to say scissor and paste. Now it has become cut and paste. You cut it on a screen, you paste it somewhere, that is your research. You show it to your supervisor, he said that great work that you have done. We are the people of shortcut. Let us give up this culture of shortcut. Go for the long cut in conducting our research. Why? Because it's only research which will contribute to the generation of knowledge. It is only this knowledge with the help of which you will challenge the given kind of a historical understanding. This is one part. Another thing, look at two other people. And that is where I will give you my rebuttal, blow by blow, block by block. Very important historian. I do not know how many of you are students of history here. But the very fact that you are participating in this conference, I would like to believe that you have at least interest in history, if not a student of history. There is a very big name called Francis Robinson, long time associated with Cambridge, then other places. For last 25 years, or 30 years perhaps, yeah, more than 30, 35 years, the only thing which he has said, theoretically, and on the basis of which he organizes his empirical data, is that wherever Muslims happen to be in minority, separatism is inherent. That is, they also talk like RSS, big historian. He said that Muslims can never be nationalist. You cannot trust them. The only thing they want is to have a separate path, separate way. I can understand if they were talking about AIML in 1940s. I can understand about any such organization which has been talking about it, but to club entire Muslim community of Indian subcontinent in pre-partition times to say that they all by nature are separatist is a matter of fact denying the historical development throughout. That is Francis Robinson. In 1985, in 2000, in 2005, whenever he writes, the only thing which he says that separatism is inherent among Muslims. Why separatism is inherent? Because they cannot live with other communities. And only when you start looking into history, and this is not only that, there is another political scientist, Paul Arbaras, who is also given to talk like this, but he said that separatism is used as an instrument. It is not an essential component of the Muslim community, but it's certainly used as a tool. Keep their point of view in mind, and then go back in time, and then see the kind of joint struggle Hindus and Muslims together put up. I'll give you 4 or 5 examples to begin with. And one of the finest examples, much of the development that took place in northern part of India and western part of India, it was not able to touch deep down the southern part of India, but then as part of the larger history of the country, history of the nation, it is important for us to pay attention to. And that is where you look at the development of 1857. I request the organizers to remind me when my time is coming to a close. 45 minutes. I have spoken for about 25 minutes. Till 11:30? Okay. That is assurance to you that I will not bore you any more than 11:30. Look at 1857. I don't know if 1857 is a subject of our discussion. In universities like Calicut or other universities in southern part of India. One of the finest periods of India's history from the point of view of inter-community relations between Hindus and Muslims. Hindus and Muslims have always been distinct. But being distinct does not mean that you are at loggerheads. You are in conflict. Any kind of tension. No. It is a recognizable fact that my neighbor is a Hindu and I am a Muslim. And that is all. way back in 1857, some of the facts, you can never change, but interpretations will always change with the passage of time, and historians will try to bring that kind of interpretations. Two facts I will like you to remind yourself. Soldiers who started from Meerut to Delhi came to Bahadur Shah Zafar's palace, requested him to become the leader of the rebellion. 80% of them happened to be Hindus, upper caste Hindus, Brahmins, Rajputs, and others. One would wonder, why of all the people asking the last Mughal ruler to become the leader of the rebellion? That means all that kind of history that we are taught, and much of the responsibility for that distortion in history is also because of colonial writers. That Hindus and Muslims were at loggerheads all the time, which is historically not correct. Had that been so, historical memory can be very, very long. Historical memory has a longer life than a human being. A human being will live for 50 years, 60 years, 70 years, 80 years, 90 years, and after that, life will come to an end. That's the kind of expiry mark for a human life, no? If man doesn't die, bottle will crack. Medicine will become useless. So, there is an expiry date. But historical memory doesn't have an expiry date. And still they all came to Bahadur Shah Zafar, requesting to become the leader of the rebellion. And he agreed. That's first. Number two, in the context of the rebellion of 1857, a much maligned word today, that is jihad. A call for jihad was given. And posters were put up on the Jama Masjid of Delhi, inviting everybody to rebel against the British and calling that process jihad. The British put up a parallel poster against it, saying that why are you declaring jihad against us? We as Christians are also people of the book, what is technically called Ahle Kitab. How can you launch jihad against Ahle Kitab? You should launch jihad against Hindus. Then ulama of the time put up another poster saying Hindus are our brothers, whereas you are our enemy. You are enemy of Hindus and Muslims both, and therefore we jointly declare a jihad against you. Who are the people who responded to the call of jihad? Hindus and Muslims both. Why? Because this jihad was against an unjust ruler. That's example number two. There is a third example which is rarely talked about, and girls should be happy, especially. There was this lady, and please raise your hand in case you have heard of the name of this lady, or rather two ladies. Have you heard of Jhansi Ki Rani? Jhansi Ki Rani? But have you heard of another lady called Begum Hazrat Mahal? Have? You have heard? Oh, I'm really happy that you have heard. Where did she come from? No. Men this side will have to keep quiet. Only girls will speak. Begum Hazrat Mahal, where did she come from? Any one person. No, men are not listening. One person tell me, where did she come from? Begum Hazrat Mahal was the wife of the deposed Nawab Wajid Ali Shah. When the rebellion broke out, she declared her son as Nawab Birjis Qadar of Awadh. And she was supported by Hindu Rajas, she was supported by Muslim Talukdars, she was supported by all. Begum Hazrat Mahal was a military leader. She was a diplomat. She was a political leader. Today, we remember Jhansi Ki Rani so much, but we have completely forgotten about Begum Hazrat Mahal. She took along everybody, Hindus and Muslims together. She gave no call of religion to fight against the British, except that she highlighted the kind of atrocities that have been carried out by the British and to take up the cause. When Queen Victoria made that kind of royal declaration, in rebuttal to that, Begum Hazrat Mahal also issued another declaration saying that word by word, it is wrong, false, it should be rejected. We do not remember these figures. She had become an icon of Hindu-Muslim unity in northern India in the context of 1857. That means, in sum total, 1857 was a remarkable period from the point of view of Hindu-Muslim solidarity. It is this memory that we should reinforce day in and day out in the face of the onslaught on history when they say that the Muslims did not participate in the liberation of India. They participated on a very large scale. As a matter of fact, the repression of Muslims in post-1857 was severe. Others were also suppressed, but Muslims were suppressed more. We should remember. But after that, what happened? After that, then you realize that the violence was so large in suppressing the rebellion that for a very long time, people did not think of launching another violent resistance to the colonial rule. Then people started taking to the ideological routes. One ideological route in resistance to the colonial rule was establishment of Darul Uloom at Deoband. The previous speaker was mentioning Rashid Ahmad Gangohi and others. What was Darul Uloom Deoband? Two things. Number one, the resistance to the colonial rule shifted from political arena to intellectual arena, saying that we will not accept financial assistance as we will not accept intellectual influence of the British in the course of establishment of Darul Uloom at Deoband. That means resistance continued, except that the nature of resistance changed from political to intellectual and academic. It is this Darul Uloom at Deoband which, at the time of the formation of Indian National Congress and after, made a declaration that they were hand in gloves with Indian National Congress in fighting against the British. They would collaborate with Indian National Congress. They would promote the cause of Indian nationalism with the help of Islam. And then you realize that this is one. There is another kind of a response which emerged from within the Muslim community. And that is, they said that no, maybe Muslims joining Indian National Congress may not be in the best interest. Someone as important as Sir Syed Ahmad Khan said it in the context of the making of Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College. And he thought that the Muslims' fortune could be best promoted only by collaborating with the British. A lot of historians will tell us that from within the Muslim community, there emerged a voice of separatism. Leading person will be Francis Robinson. But do not blame Francis Robinson alone, as there are many other historians who followed this line. But the problem is that Sir Syed Ahmad Khan was the only one. There were other voices which were supporting of Indian National Congress and Indian nationalism. I just gave you an example of Darul Uloom at Deoband. So therefore, another theoretical point which you can mark, note down in case you wish, is that each time there is an important development, there is this expectation. If the expectation is not fulfilled, then it is imposed, superimposed, that there can only be one voice from within the Muslim community. Whereas the possibility of multiplicity of voices, that is, many voices emerging from within the Muslim community, has been present at any point of time in history, as even in contemporary times. But why pick on only Sir Syed Ahmad Khan to say that the Muslims accepted a separatist path? That in itself was a questionable proposition, because, nationalism at that point had a different character than nationalism of, say, 1920s, 30s, and 40s. And at the same time, you have another path opening up for a lot of people. If you look at Muslim participation in Indian National Congress, despite Sir Syed Ahmad Khan's opposition, year after year, number of Muslim delegates kept on increasing in the annual sessions of Indian National Congress. Badruddin Tayyab ji was one such figure from Bombay, but he was not the only one. There were so many others who were willing to join Indian National Congress. That means from within the community there were a multiplicity of voices, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever number, because depending what was the historical context, what was the immediate ideological and political context of a particular section of the Muslim community to have raised their voice. But a large number of them spoke in favor of Indian nationalism. It spoke to align with Indian National Congress. But then there were others who did not, neither spoke in favor of joining Indian National Congress or any such body. They simply raised ideological question. Ideological question by marshalling, mobilizing religio-cultural resources from within Islam to resist the colonial rule. One example with the help of which I'll try to explain and then bring my presentation to an end, because my time is almost coming to a close. There is one intellectual, a towering intellectual, enjoyed global importance, recognition and everything. Some of you might have heard of his name, Jamaluddin al-Afghani, a very powerful intellectual of the 19th century. And he had come to India during 1880, lived here for about 2 years, 2 to 3 years, visited different places, Calcutta, Hyderabad, other places, wrote many essays, delivered many public lectures like this. 3 things that he talked about. That will be my last point. 3 things that he talked about. And those 3 things, even after more than 100 years, are still relevant, provided we pay closer attention to the formulations, academic, intellectual, and political formulations of Jamaluddin al-Afghani, vitally important. Number 1, he said, Muslims must continuously bring about reforms among themselves. That is, they must develop a culture of ijtihad. Do you understand ijtihad? No. Do you understand jihad? Everybody understands jihad. But ijtihad is innovation. And ijtihad within the larger framework of Islamic understanding of issues. You discuss, debate, discuss among yourselves in order to come up with a formulation which would be by consensus acceptable to everyone. Bring about that kind of ijtihad. Only on the basis of ijtihad you will be able to bring about reforms within your own self. A lot of debate is taking place in northern India. I do not know. It must be happening here also. If triple talaq at one given point of time is acceptable, should be acceptable, a lot of women are raising this question. Should men go for multiple marriages? Muslim Personal Law Board is resisting. I do not know if they really get to speak to women, young women, educated women. What is their kind of an opinion? A lot of questions are being raised about it. Let us be honest and raise these questions. Create a culture, climate of ijtihad, and say what was Sheikh Abduh was one of the very good disciples of Jamaluddin Afghani. He said that given the kind of condition Islam imposes on multiple marriages, Islam essentially is a monogamous marriage religion. But people go, not that, polygamy is rampant among Muslims. This is a false impression because of permission. There are a lot of statistical study that the Muslims are the least polygamous group. More polygamous groups are others among non-Muslims, but that's another issue. Jamaluddin Afghani wanted to discuss social reforms among Muslims. Reforms, if you close the doors on reforms, Muslim society will go into decay. In many places, they have gone into decay, precisely because there have been no reforms. That's number one. Number two, what Jamaluddin Afghani argued about all his life, in his essays, public lectures, Islam and science are not contradiction in terms. Islam and science are compatible. They can align, they can take society forward. He said that the Muslims have completely given up on science. Why? Because they think that science is contradictory to Islam, Islamic values, whatever. And three, politically more important than the two, Muslims must come forward to fight against the British. But they should not do it alone. They should align with the non-Muslims, which in Indian context, he said that the Muslims must provide leadership aligned with Hindus to continue with the fight against the British. He said that it's their immediate and the most important job is to liberate themselves from the colonial rule. Jamaluddin Afghani had created a very powerful intellectual climate for a lot other people to follow. Maulana Azad happened to be one of them. In the pages of Al-Hilal, he repeatedly used the resources of Islam. Al-Balagh also. Resources of Islam. To say that it is possible that you mobilize resources of Islam to fight against the British. And in the course of it, if possible, join hands with non-Muslims. And in order to reinforce this point, he gave an example of Misaq-e-Madina, covenant which was signed during the lifetime of Prophet Muhammad himself. And he gathered all kinds of people, Muslims, Jews, pagans, others, and he declared that we all are Ummah Wahida. Maulana Azad used that precedent to say that we all can emerge as Ummah Wahida by aligning with. This is our history. The kind of contributions made by Maulana Azad, many people would wonder. Some of you present here will also wonder. Maulana Azad was given solitary confinement at a time when Mahatma Gandhi had not returned to India, or he was still familiarizing himself with the conditions of India. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru was still studying in England. Maulana Azad was suffering because he was thrown out of Calcutta, sent to a place called Ranchi to live in confinement. That is Maulana Azad, because he had already generated that kind of ideological climate with the help of Al-Hilal and Al-Balagh. What did he do after he went to Ranchi? He tried to mobilize intellectual resources and establish a madrasa. Madrasa, the building is still there. As a small madrasa which still runs there. There's a small college also which is organized from the same building. I have been there. It's interesting. He established this madrasa called Madrasa Islamia Ranchi. And you want to know who was the biggest donor to establish this madrasa? A Hindu of Ranchi called Rai Sahab Thakur Das Rais Ranchi. That's a very important man. Rais is Rais. And he is Rai Sahab Thakur Das. And what was the curriculum? What was the syllabus? Most modern. Geography, science, maths, English, history, and of course, the standard Islamic things, like fiqh, other things. This is Madrasa Islamia. With the help of Hindus. That means, in 1 minute, towards summing up, what I'm trying to tell you is important to pay attention to history, not in terms of details, but also putting those details in some perspective, what is called theoretical perspective. Then, once you have done it, try to study specific. You know, studying all India thing is fine, but also study things specific to Kerala. Look at the kind of contributions your ancestors made to reinforcing Indian nationalism, made sacrifices, suffered, built institutions which were exclusive to Muslims, but which were also inclusive, which accommodated others. In one of my essays, I titled the essay like this: Exclusive Resources, Inclusive Objective, Islam in the Making of Indian Nationalism. This is something which Maulana Azad was doing. The book, the gentleman, while introducing me as a speaker of the day, said that I wrote this book in 2011 called Resisting Colonialism and Communal Politics, Maulana Azad and the Making of the Indian Nation. Believe me, Maulana Azad was always seen as somebody involved in the minority affairs. There is a ministry also which has been named only, like there is a scholarship which is offered by the minority affairs. But Maulana Azad was larger. Not only minority, not only Muslims, he was responsible for building process of Indian nationalism. That book exhausted itself, went for a paperback. And I'm happy to announce in Kerala, where some people know Arabic, that from Lebanon, only 3 days ago I received a copy. It's been translated into Arabic. It says, Abul Kalam Azad Batashakkulul Ummatul Hindiya. That is, somebody who was responsible for, making of the Indian nation. That means you and I can singularly contribute as citizens, as individuals, as intellectuals, as writers, as students, in reinforcing the nationalist process. Historically, our ancestors did. In contemporary times, you and I can do, provided we have clarity of thoughts, we pay attention to contemporary studies, but we also pay attention to historical studies, contributions made by all of us, ancestors and the rest. I think that would be the takeaway of this one-day long conference. I once again thank the organizers for their invitation to me to be with you, and thank you so much for your patience.
Thank you, sir. We are fortunate to witness a kind of strong intellectual defense of Indian nationalism. And interestingly, that came from an institution which in itself was a legacy of Muslim involvement in national movement. That was actually Jamia, Millia, Islamia. And indeed, the points he made are open for debate and discussion. And for providing such a theoretical framework and showing us what was the crucial role Muslims played in the making of the Indian nationalism. The talk was really rich and it enlightened us a lot. Thank you, sir.